Whatever stage we're at in business or in podcasting, there's always going to be fresh challenges at every stage. But the good news is you can always be creative and leverage your team, leverage people around you to really think outside the box and get through those struggles.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to Pop. This is your Pop, your friend, Adam AAA Adams. Hey, podcaster, just a quick interruption to read an honest review that came in from The Fallible Man. The Fallible Man, he says, I wish I had met him first. I wish I had found this podcast before I started one, says The Fallible Man. There is so much there. It would have saved me many headaches. Adam's insights are extremely helpful, even at a ways into my journey as a podcaster. Well, The Fallible Man, thank you. And actually, I was on your show, which was kind of cool. You just got your first entry into winning some free services from Grow Your Show. Matt Cummings won a couple of months ago. Stacy just won this recent month. And The Fallible Man, you have an opportunity to potentially be entered in an additional 5. All you would have to do is just screenshot this written review that you gave me and then email me team@growyourshow.com. And then just let me know that you heard yourself on this episode, give the episode number. And then not only will you have the one entry that you already have, but you'll actually have 5 more entries. So you have 6 total entries. What Matt Cummings won was our full service for 12 months. Matt won some significant stuff. And same with Stacy. She won any package that she chooses for 6 months at the lowest tier level. And The Fallible Man, you've got an opportunity. And if you're listening and you want to be entered to win like some free services from my company, it's called Grow Your Show. You can find us at growyourshow.com. We've got a few different packages. You could win marketing for either 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months for free. You could win Editing Plus, which is the whole back office where we do everything, even emailing your guest for you, right? Doing all of this organic promotion for you on your behalf. Like we just do so much on the Editing Plus. So you might be able to win that. Or the other option is our full service, all inclusive. It's all inclusive. It has everything. Branding, marketing, editing, all of that stuff. So anyway, if you want to be entered to win and you haven't done it yet, the first step is to leave an honest review on Apple Podcast. The second step is, well, that's already going to happen. You're already going to be added. And then if you want 5 more entries, just like Stacy, our winner last time, she heard her review on the podcast. And so she just went ahead and screenshotted it and let me know, hey, I heard my name. I want those other 5. And she got it. And then she ended up winning. So good stuff. Let's jump back into the episode. Congrats and good luck. And actually, I have a good friend that is on the show today, Annie Dickerson. And I'm really excited to get into her story. One of the takeaways that you'll see is that she and her business partner planned to not do a podcast. They planned to only get on other people's podcasts. And somewhere along the way that changed. And their podcast, last I checked, was ranking top 1% in the entire world, which is insane. They're ranking across multiple different countries in multiple different categories, like the business tech category. And I'm going to ask her kind of her process. What did she learn along the way? Because I want to pour into you and I want you to be able to gain from Annie's story. So Annie, first off, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks, Adam. I'm thrilled to be here with you and your listeners.
It's going to be fun. The first question that I wanted to ask you is just like, you really don't have just one business. You're really doing more than one thing. Is that right?
That's right. So our core business, Good Egg Investments, is where we do passive real estate deals. So we offer these opportunities for investors to come in and invest alongside us. And then we have the real estate accelerator side of our business. That's our coaching and mentorship program for people who want to be active and raise capital for their own deals.
What made you want to have basically two avatars? What made you decide that doing both would be the right move? In some cases, it's like a totally different business. It's like different advertising. It's different avatar. What made you think like, I want to have both? I don't want to just do one.
Oh, it's hard. It's never something we intended to do. Just as Julie and I never intended to start a business, but it grew out of a need that we saw out there as we were talking to friends and family. We saw that we could help them. And so that's how Good Egg Investments came to be. And then we were running that for a little while. And as we started seeing success, we saw another area where we could help people, which was all these people coming to us saying, wait a second, I want to know how you're doing what you're doing, raising capital and doing these deals. Teach me. So we'd hop on these calls and we'd try to give as much value as we could. But as you know, you can't teach people to run a whole business in 30 minutes or even an hour. And so pretty quickly, we realized there was a huge need here as well. And it was a different avatar. And so it's not easy running two fairly different businesses and having two avatars, but it's really strengthened our business overall, I think. Yeah. Because as you know, the real estate business or the market really, it's not a constant, stable thing. It's up and down and up and down. And so, for example, earlier this year, we were having a really hard time finding really good deals. And so the good side of our business slowed down a little bit. We were still talking to people, growing our investor base, still looking at deals, but we weren't putting out any opportunities. Meanwhile, the real estate accelerator side of the business was booming because there were a lot of people wanting to get into this business. And so we find that with the two different avatars, even though it's more work and more manpower, it helps us overall to grow the business on multiple fronts.
I have a question, and it's mainly because I know the numbers are high. I know the numbers are really incredible. You and Julie have done something truly remarkable. It's how much real estate total value have you guys like partnered in on?
We've been a part of deals that are now valued at over $900 million in the last 3.5 years.
That's insane. Like that is so out of this world in such a short time. You've been so successful at that. And your real estate accelerator company, that other part of the business, has been really, really, really successful as well. I know a good handful of your clients that just speak so highly of working with you, that they've been able to raise more money because of you. They're getting booked on podcasts that are growing their influence through what you guys do. And it's truly impressive. Would you mind maybe taking a moment to, unless you feel like it's been completely answered, if there's any other details that can help us in the two businesses, specifically, who do you serve and how do you serve them?
Yeah. So with Good Egg Investments, we're serving people who they're busy people. They're not real estate nerds. They're busy doctors, they're teachers, they're lawyers, they're engineers, they're business owners themselves. And oftentimes they've heard, oh, I should get into real estate. And maybe they've tried investing in real estate before, but just like me, when I invested in rental properties, I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? Another call from my property manager, another surprise bill that I got to deal with. And after a while, it just became too much. And I ran into a dead end. And that's what a lot of people that we're serving through Good Egg are experiencing as well. Maybe they've dipped their toes into investing in real estate, but they're finding that it's not quite the right fit. It's a little too much work, more than they anticipated. And so they're looking for something where they can still put their money into real estate and get all the benefits, but without the hassles of being a landlord. And so through that, we really help them to build up their passive income, to build long-term wealth, and to really gain those tax benefits. And so that's on the Good Egg side of the business. And it's funny because the two, they are very different avatars, but they kind of serve one and the same, because ultimately on the coaching side of the business, we are helping to shape this industry. And so just like the brand we've built and the marketing we've put out and the educational resources we've put out have reached a lot of people, we're now helping more and more businesses to target their own audiences, their own investors. So some are geared specifically toward physicians who want to be passive investors. Some are geared toward, we had one who was geared specifically towards pharmacists or retirees or veterans. And so you know how important having a core avatar is. And for Good Egg Investments is busy moms. And so not everybody resonates with our brand, but through the Real Estate Accelerator, we can help all these other businesses to take the core of what we've built through Good Egg Investments and share that out to all these different audiences. And so in a way, it's almost like we get to take what we're doing through Good Egg and we are making it even more exponential.
I love it. Have you ever heard of some of those companies that like they have, and this is not a negative thing to say in any way, although I can see how it could be taken that way. But have you ever heard like some of those companies that have this waste, like this stuff that happens organically through what they're building, and later on they learn that they can like package that up and sell it?
Yes.
It's almost like that, though, for you guys. It's like you already know how to do this. You've already practiced this. You've already figured out the plan. And now you're just like, I have this stuff. We can do another thing with it and be able to serve more people.
Exactly. It reminds me of the story of how Slack got started, right? I think they were like a gaming company first. And the messaging was just how they messaged each other internally on their team. And when the gaming side of the business went belly up, they said, okay, well, what can we salvage from this? And they said, well, this messaging thing, that was working really well. And so then they took that and grew that into what we now know as Slack, which is incredible. So that's like waste that you're talking about, right? And I think as business owners, we just have to be resourceful and always be observant and see what's working and not working and be able to pivot, especially when a global pandemic comes along, be able to pivot and take anything in stride and be ready to roll with the punches.
What did you do before you got started with these two companies?
Yeah, I'm going to go way back to give your listeners the full view. I started out as an elementary school teacher, and then I got into game design. I wanted to create educational games for kids. And then after that, I got into instructional design, through which I was creating these onboarding, compliance, all these trainings for large companies like Google and Facebook. And that was the last thing I was doing. I was working as a creative director in the instructional design space.
All right, cool. And what made you, because I mentioned to our listener that there was a time that you were like, we're not going to have a podcast. We don't need our own podcast. We just need to get on other people's podcasts. So like, what made you finally decide that you were going to have your own?
Yeah. So I think we were running our business for probably 5 or 6 months before we hopped on our first podcast as a guest. And the first time we did it, we were really nervous. And we're like, oh my gosh, like this is going to go. We don't know how this is going to go, but it actually went really well. And we're like, okay, we got a few leads from that. Let's do that again. Let's see what other podcasts we can get on. And so we started to get on other people's podcasts, and we found that they were hit or miss. So some we got a ton of leads from, a lot of exposure, and some it'd be crickets. We'd do it, and it was great to put on our website and share with our audience, but maybe we didn't get any new leads from it. And that was okay because we were building our platform, and each time we were sharing our story, we were expanding our audience and getting our message out to more people. And so we thought for a long time, we were like, okay, this is it. Let's just keep doing this. Let's just keep finding more podcasts, right? And for a while, that was accomplishing our goal of expanding our reach. But then at a certain point in the business, we realized, well, expanding our reach is part of it. But building a relationship with the people already on our list, that's another goal we aspire to. And so through a weekly podcast, we realized we could give our audience, our listeners, a weekly touch point with us as these business owners that they're following, that they're investing with. Whereas before, when we were on other people's podcasts, it was like maybe one this week, maybe nothing for the next 3 weeks, and then there'd be 2 the following week, right? And so it was sporadic. There was not that consistency. And I always tell our coaching members, when you're trying to get people to invest $50,000, $100,000, you have to have consistency to build that trust. And so for us, launching our own podcast was another signal to our investors or our potential investors, hey, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here week in and week out. And not only that, it's not all about real estate. We wanted to, through our podcast, provide our listeners a buffet of options when it came to building wealth and living the life that they wanted to live. So our guests are not just real estate investors or syndicators, but we bring on all sorts of guests in all arenas of helping them to build wealth, all these alternative strategies that you don't typically hear about. And it's really helping to grow not only our listenership, but to help the people already on our list to get to know us better. It's funny because we're interviewing other people, but still it helps people get to know us better.
Yeah, I think that's huge that you're seeing it as a holistic piece where you can stay in front of the people that already follow you. You're getting more exposure by being on other people's shows as well, but you're allowing your listener to have a better connection with you, a more intimate connection with you on a regular basis. Out of curiosity, with that in mind, I'm wondering if there's a specific strategy or things that you make sure that you hit on your show, or if you're talking about your specific business, if you do solo episodes or what, is there any part of that strategy that you could pinpoint that could be valuable to a listener who's starting a podcast or who has a fairly new podcast?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Because we had been on hundreds of podcasts by the time that we started our podcast, we really knew what worked and what didn't work. And we knew what it was like being on the other side of the table as the guest. And so when we sat down to really create the format and the flow of our show, we took the best of what we thought was working in all the shows that we had been on. And I highly recommend that. At least go on a few shows just so you know what it's like to be the guest before you sit in the host seat. So for us, our shows are all structured roughly the same. And so at the beginning, Julie and I do an intro. For ours, we pull out some key nuggets from the conversation. So we record it after the interview and we talk about all the insights that we got from the interview. And then we also talk about life. We travel a lot. We have growing families. And so we're talking about the antics that our kids are getting up to or where we're traveling, things like that. And then we introduce the guest. The first half of the show, we really dive into the backstory of that guest, how they got to where they are today. And because we're talking about alternative investments, often there's a really cool and interesting story. They were doing something completely different, and all of a sudden they were introduced to this strategy, and they thought, oh no, that can't work. And they tried to get away from it, tried not to do it, and then they tried it, and oh my gosh, it changed everything, right? So we hear stories like that a lot. And then the second half of the show, we then dive in deeper to the strategy. So for example, if it's infinite banking, or if they're investing in mobile home parks or self-storage or whatever it is, we dive a little deeper to get some key insights for our listeners so they have some actionable tips. And then we have this, we call it our Life and Money Spotlight round at the end where we ask everyone 3 questions. We've been doing it across hundreds of episodes now. We ask them first how they're living a meaningful, intentional life by design. We ask them to share one hack with the audience that can help them, a resource, a tip, a book, something like that that will help the listeners. And we ask them, the final question is how they're helping to make the world a better place. And so through that, we're able to get a broad range of not only how this person got to where they are today to build that trust with the listener, but also share a little bit deeper about the strategies that they're using and what they're seeing out there, and then give the listener some actionable insights that they can take with them.
A lot of good takeaways there. So here's the thing. You have the same structure, And what my takeaways are from your structure, it's like part A is talking about what you're going to learn. So getting the audience almost hooked to what we're going to learn. B is you talk about yourself. You talk about what is going on in your life. And I believe that helps your listener really connect with you as a person, and not just as a business person, but as a human person. C, you get to know how they learned, what they're about to do. And D, you get the actionable tips. And E, the last piece, is you're basically doing, on my podcast, my old one, it was the final 5. I always had the final 5, and it was basically like, what book do you recommend? What's your most creative deal? That kind of stuff. Joe Farrellis does it. He's a mutual friend of yours and mine. He also has a huge portfolio similar to the size of yours, nearing $1 billion, which is nuts. And he'll do something where I think he calls it the lightning round or something like that. What does he call it? I forgot. Is it called the lightning round?
Sure.
The fire round? It
must be like the best ever fire round or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Knowing him.
One of the times that I was on, he goes, Adam, are you ready to get into the best advice ever? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And he's like, you're ready. You've got a podcast. That was a long time ago. But it's E is this like way that you always close it out. And part of E has those 3 main questions that I noticed. One was like, what is meaningful, intentional, like life by design? What are you doing there? The next one was like a tip, a hack, or a book that they might recommend or they could leave with a listener. And the last one was, what are they doing to make a world a better place? I think that going through that process, definitely all of those things can be valuable to your business. All of those things can be valuable to your listeners. I really like that. And I hope our listener, who's a podcaster, implements what's their ABCDE. Speaking of what you called this, what I am calling E, the Life and Money Spotlight. You rebranded your show.
We did.
You rebranded. And so the listener knows we actually do the editing and post-production for these guys' podcast. And it took me by surprise. It was like, oh, you're rebranding? Okay, what do we do? Because it's just as hard on us as it would be on you to rebrand if we're doing all the promotional stuff. But out of curiosity, what did you think of that? Why did you do it? What were the pros and cons about it? Are you glad you did it? I think that you rebranding your podcast is something that somebody listening is already thinking about if they should be doing that. So what were kind of your considerations and takeaways for that?
Well, before, just so the listeners know, before our show was called Investing for Good, which for a long time was the motto of Good Egg Investments. And when we sat down to think, it was probably maybe a year into the show. And it was really looking back and thinking through, okay, who are the guests who have been on the show? And who are the guests who we want to have on the show? And is it really all about investing, or is it about something bigger? And so that's when we started to think about, okay, well, it's really about this intersection of life and money. It's about how do you use money as a tool? How do you build wealth? And then how do you use that to create the life that you want to live, this meaningful and intentional life by design? And so it wasn't easy, but once we decided to do it, it took probably, a few weeks there where we were like, okay, these are all the things that we need to be done. We had a spreadsheet and your team was fantastic and we're great partners throughout that process. And overall, I'm very happy that we did the rebrand because now it opens up the range of what we cover in the show. So it signals to people currently listening to the show as well as future listeners that, hey, this isn't just about investing. Some people are intimidated by investing. They think it's not right for them, or they hear investing for good and they think, oh, that's impact investing. So a lot of people have preconceived notions about that. And so now by opening it up to life and money, now we're talking about everything. It applies to everybody. And that's really what we wanted to be able to do, is expand our reach and get our message across to more people, whether or not they decide to invest with us or join our coaching program, doesn't matter. It's really about providing value in a way that's accessible to them.
I love that. I think that that's a huge takeaway and a huge reason that we should be having a podcast. I like the way that you put that. I want to talk about your journey. Besides ending up having a rebrand later on, I want to discuss and besides the fact that you weren't sure if you should have one in the beginning, you might have just wanted to hack into other people's networks. But yeah. I'm just wondering what challenges you guys came across that you faced. And whatever they are, how did you overcome those challenges in the beginning?
Oh, man. Even though we were on so many podcasts before we started our own podcast, it still seemed like this impossible task to switch to the other side of the table. It was always the excuses, right? It was like, oh, we don't have the right tech, or, oh, how are we going to find the right guests? Or, oh my gosh, how are we going to find the time? How are we going to create the guest guide? How are we going to decide on the flow? There were all these things holding us back. And what we realized, it was because those things were in our way because we didn't have a strong enough why. And when we figured out that why, that's when we were able to get through all those roadblocks. And so once we realized the value to the business and, hey, if we did this, this growth would result in the business and this impact would come and we would be able to reach more people and we would be able to help more people. Then all of a sudden it put all those little things into perspective. And we said, okay, we can figure this out. So instead of figuring out the how, though, wise people go after the who. So we said, okay, who do we know who's already in this space, who have podcasts and who we can leverage? So we reached out to people like you and we were like, okay, what tech are you using? How are you doing this piece? And we started to gather our insights and we said, okay, well, looks like we both need this microphone and we may want a green screen. This is the
Which mic do you have, out of curiosity?
Oh my gosh, I don't even.
It looks like the Samsung Q2U, is that right?
It's the ATR one, I think.
Oh, ATR 2100X.
That's the one. Yes. Okay.
Cool.
That's the one.
So it's good mic. Sorry to cut you off. You were on a roll. No. I liked where you were going.
So all those little things, right? We were able to figure them out and we got stuck on the guest guide for a long time. We were like, oh my gosh, what a chore putting this together. But then
what do you mean a guest guide? That's kind of like onboarding the guest to come on so they know what to expect.
Yeah. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's like a one pager. We tell them who our audience is on the show, what they can expect, how long the show is, that we record video and audio. We give them links if they want to get their own microphone. We give them sort of an overview of the types of questions that we ask and what to expect after the show. So nothing super complicated, but it was just like, oh, okay, we got to put this thing together. How are we going to set up the flow, right? Who's going to interview or who's going to reach out to the guest and send them this? How are they going to upload their bio and their photo? So it's a lot of those little pieces, but once we had that big why, it really put that into perspective because we were able to tap the team, leverage people we know to really just hammer through all of that. And then we recorded our first 10 episodes before we launched. That was the other big thing, the big question mark. I don't know why it was so difficult. It seemed impossible to figure out. We were like, okay, how do we get the episode from my computer to out to everybody? What's that process like? Do I apply through Apple? How does that work? How long does that take? What pieces do we need? But at the end of the day, all of that, it seemed like a huge thing at the time, but it's all doable. And if you tap into people like Adam, who have done it before and who have all the tools and resources, it makes it super easy. And then for all the listeners, once you get over that hump and you launch your own podcast and you start growing that listenership, it will do wonders for your business.
I love that. My favorite quote today so far is you were talking about being confused or stressed about the technology or the guests or the time that it might take or what the flow would be. And you said those things were in our way because we didn't have a strong enough why yet, because that why wasn't there. And I think that's got to be true for anything that we do. I'm going to probably quote you for years down the road because it's just resonating with me how you stated that. There's a lot of things that we allow to kind of hold us back. And in some cases, I think we got to get to the why are we doing this? And if that's strong enough, we can basically accomplish anything and overcome all of those objections. But yeah, I really appreciate that. I want to be mindful of your time. I do have about 3 more questions that I think would be really beneficial to the listener. Do you have a few more minutes that you could spend with us?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do this. Let's take a quick break and we'll get into these 3 questions. One of them's websites, tips, tricks, tools, and hacks that you might have that I think you've learned along the way. And there's a couple other good ones. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, GrowYourShow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back with Annie Dickerson from, I almost called Investing for Good. How embarrassing is that? The Life and Money Show. Good, so. And actually, we ended right before the break. We were talking about some of the struggles that they had. And along the way, where I want to go now is just out of curiosity. Is there something that's still lingering? Is there something that's currently happening that you might be able to share with the audience so that they know what to look for?
Oh, yeah. Now our struggle is, we've gotten over all the little things and we've gotten into a flow with it. We've done hundreds of these interviews at this point. So it's like, it's easy now. When we hop on an interview, it's like we know exactly. Julie and I can read each other and we're like, okay, you're going to ask the next question. We do it with our eyes. Like we can see each other in the Zoom. And so that part we've got down pat. Where we struggle is really the time and sometimes the consistency. So the time, Julie and I are both busy moms. That's why we got into this business, is to help other busy families to build wealth for themselves. And so as part of that, through COVID especially, our schedules have shifted here and there with homeschooling, with travel, with all these other commitments. And so it's hard sometimes to sync up and to find an hour of time, at least once a week, to do these interviews. And so what we did was, sometimes we'd batch them together. So we'd do a few in a week. And then that would give us a little bit of a buffer for a few weeks if we knew one of us was traveling or would be off for a few days. And sometimes we've done solo shows. Sometimes we've interviewed people on our team rather than having an outside guest come in. And at least once or twice, we've done a replay of an episode, but with a new intro. So pulling out fresh insights. And so I think there's always going to be, at whatever stage we're at in business or in podcasting, there's always going to be fresh challenges at every stage. But the good news is you can always be creative and leverage your team, leverage people around you to really think outside the box and get through those struggles.
Thank you for going into that. I think it's important to know that always going to be challenges. There's always going to be challenges with marriage. There's always going to be challenges with our kids. There's always going to be challenges with our business. Podcasting is no different. And it's okay. We take the good for the bad. Speaking of the good for the bad, though, I want to know, if you don't mind trying to figure out, pinpointing the best thing about your podcast or the number one reason why you have a podcast, and at the same time, the thing that you hate about podcasting. I'd be really curious. So what's the best and the worst parts of your podcast?
Oh, man, the best part is the people we get to meet. Such cool people. It gives us a platform to talk to pretty much anybody we want. right? That's the coolest part. The other day we had Bonnie St. John on our podcast, Olympic medalist. At the age of 5, she had to make this decision to have her leg amputated. And then she went on to become an Olympic skier, and she worked in the White House, and now she runs this Leadership Institute for Women. She's absolutely incredible. And had we not had a podcast, maybe we wouldn't get a chance to sit down and talk to her for a full hour and dig into her insights and learn the wisdom that she has to share with us. And so I think by far getting to meet all these cool people, and often Julie and I will be furiously taking notes as we're talking because we get to learn, right? It's almost like every week or every podcast, we get to sit down and learn from an expert in whatever field. And yes, we're sharing that with our listeners too, but we've got that front row seat and we get to ask whatever questions we want. There have been numerous times where after the show ends, we go and sign up for whatever service or product that person is offering. We're like, oh my gosh, that was so cool. I want to go and learn about land investing, or I want to learn about this. So that part is super fun. It's almost like we get to just have fun and learn through these conversations. As for the part I hate, that's a hard one.
You're such a positive person. I thought this might be difficult for you to find something, actually.
I know. You know what? I think the hard part probably is turning guests away. So that can be difficult. Now that we've built a listenership and we have hundreds of episodes out there, we get pitched quite often by people who want to be on our podcast. And we can't say yes to everybody because 1, we don't have all that much time. And 2, we have to make sure that the people who come on our podcast will provide real value for our listeners. And so sometimes that means we have to turn people down. So that part I would say is probably the harder part, because if I had my way, I'd talk to everybody. I'd have everybody on the podcast. But then I feel like sometimes that would water it down a little bit because you don't want to have 10 financial advisors in a row, right? You want to be strategic and careful about the types of guests that you have on the show and the cadence with which you rotate through the different areas that you're trying to cover.
One thing that I started thinking and remembering about, do you know Tom Kroll at all? Do you know Tom Kroll?
No, I don't think so.
By the way, he would be an amazing guest on your podcast, like one that you would want to say yes to. He founded Wholesaling Inc. and then sold it. And his main thing is creating businesses that he can sell. He's just such an incredible guy. But you mentioned how you have to turn away a lot of people, and that's sometimes not easy. It's not difficult, but you have an amazing podcast. I was just thinking about a social media post he literally just did like this week. It was something to the effect of that billionaires don't do more than the rest of us. They say no more than the rest of us. And I think it's interesting that it can be hard. There's a lot of good that could come on our podcast, that there's a lot of good people. There's a lot of things that would be okay, that we wouldn't have to hurt anyone's feelings. But when we focus, when we make sure that we're turning that away when we need to, so that we can make sure that the podcast is as good as it can be, ultimately, it's going to be a better podcast. But it can be challenging. So I'm glad you brought it up. The last thing that I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to put you in touch with Tom. You're going to really like him. The last thing I wanted to find out from you, and it's almost like as if either we have the same mind or I just stole this from you after you told me about your life and money spotlight last questions, and one of them being a hack. But I want to know like what website or hack or tools or services or automation that you've believe in and that you use that have helped you be better at your podcast. And I know one of them is like something about what you do with your guests after they've been on the show.
Yes, absolutely. There's so many things we've discovered and a lot of things we've tried that worked and some things that didn't work. So I have a few that I'll share. One is that hack around what we do after. So not with every guest, but certain guests, we will, after the show, assuming it went well and we got some good insights, we'll follow up, not just with our typical thank you email, but I'll personally follow up and I'll say, oh my gosh, thank you so much for taking the time. would you mind taking a few seconds to provide a testimonial for us for our business? And these are busy people. So I don't want to give them another thing that they have to do or they feel like they need to do. And so what I do is I try to make it as easy as possible. So I say, you know what? You can write your own, or you can just pick from the 3 options below. So I take the time and I write 3 testimonials, just 1 sentence each. And I say, you can pick one of these, A, B, or C, or you can write your own. And more often than not, they'll write back and they'll say, oh my gosh, I had such a blast on the podcast. I would love to leave you a review. Let's go with option B. And boom, there we go. So now we have this awesome guest on our podcast, but now we also have this quote of them talking about our business, saying, Annie and Julie are the real deal. If you get a chance, invest with them. Something like that, right? That maybe they didn't say on the show, but here they're endorsing us because we made it so easy for them. And so we've been able to build up our testimonials and our social proof that way. In addition to that, I would say probably the biggest thing I recommend people is to make it so that you, as the podcast host, all you have to do is come in, sit down in your chair, pull up your microphone, hit record, do the show, stop the recording, and your part is done. That's the ideal. And that's why we work with your team, Adam. We love working with your team because prior to this, I was running a lot of that management myself. And every show I'd be like, oh my gosh, another episode. Okay. So I got to figure out the title. I got to make the art. I got to hire somebody to do the editing. I got to get somebody to do the show notes. And it was different people. Right. So I have to coordinate. Okay. This VA over here is doing this piece. Okay. Are you done with your piece yet? Okay, great. Are you done with your piece? All right. Okay. Let me piece it together and let me finesse it. Let me edit everything and let me post it. Right. And so the first few weeks, totally doable. I was like, I got this. I can do this. And then things got busier. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I started to get resentful, right? And that's what happens. And I was like, well, I know it took us so much work to get here to launch this podcast. I want to make it sustainable. I want to make it so that it's fun for us, so that we enjoy doing this and we bring our best selves to every episode. And in order to do that, we said, okay, how can we make this easier on ourselves so we can really leverage our strengths and then leverage other teams' strengths for what they do best? And that's why we work with your team. And then now we've leveraged people on our own internal team to invite guests, to send out those reminders and the guest guide and all of that. And so once you get to that point where you've got the system going, that is gold.
Anna, you've spent so much awesome time diving into each and every one of these questions, adding valuable takeaways that another podcaster can use to become a better podcaster. The ABCDE framework was fun to go through, to listen to how you do your podcast each and every time, that systemized it. If you ever come back on the podcast, I'm going to talk more about how you and Julie got to that eye contact. I know what's going to happen next, because there's a lot of people that listen that want to have better co-host interactions. I certainly was terrible at it. I'm just going to be completely honest. I hated it. It's remarkable that you guys do such a great job. And maybe next time we'll dive into it a little bit more. Thanks for sharing your story, what you did before the podcast. Thanks for talking a little bit about the 2 different avatars that you serve and how your podcast is able to serve both of them and bring both of those people into your world. Talking also about what made you decide to have a podcast and the challenges that you had to overcome in the beginning. And that quote that I got, what was it again? I've written it down. Those things were in the way because we didn't have a strong enough why. And the challenges that you still kind of struggle with even today, the best and worst parts of podcasting. I liked the best one. It was all about the network. The worst one, it was having to turn away people. But I think it's good, because when you turn away people, you're going to make sure that you're bringing your A game. And then just the tools that you shared. But most thing that has never come onto this podcast ever is that type of follow-up. I've never heard of that before. I love it. I'm going to state it one more time. She says, basically, she reaches out personally, but not to everybody, only to those that she really wants to make sure that this happens. And she basically says something like, would you mind taking a few seconds to do a testimonial? Or I provided 3, A, B, and C. You could just pick one. I think that's new, that's helpful. And it's like you're spending that extra time, but it's going a long way for what you guys are trying to accomplish. So that was certainly remarkable. If you're listening to this interview today, Annie's full bio is already in the show notes. Just scroll down, check it out. Annie and Julie's website is also in the show notes. Scroll down, check it out. The link to their podcast, Life and Money, is also in the show notes. Go and check it out. And please do me a favor, leave an honest rating or review. Like, just take a second to, after listening to an episode or two, and just leave a review. Let them know what you think about their podcast. And then, just so you know, this is an odd number episode. And on the even numbered episodes, it's always me pouring into you just one-on-one. And so stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. I'll see you on the next episode. 2 quick things before you go. Number 1, if you are looking to upgrade like your podcast equipment or just get your very first affordable microphone, then go to growyourshow.com/PDF. That link's in the show notes. Go ahead and scroll down. On that PDF is 100% equipment for your podcasting studio that I've personally vetted. My team has vetted this. We know that it works. We know that it's affordable, and we don't want you paying more for your podcasting equipment. So again, if you're looking to upgrade your equipment or get your very first inexpensive microphone that works great, that's where you go. And then number 2 is got a free course, A to Z, on everything you need to know about podcasting. And you don't have to go anywhere but the podcast in order to access it. You don't have to even give me an email address to access it. It is just the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So what you'll do is you'll scroll down a bit. You'll click on all episodes and scroll down, because we're hundreds of episodes in, and you'll see that episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is a free course from A to Z on launching a top podcast. Take advantage of those 2 things. I'll see you on the next episode.